As Mike Tyson and The Rock stopped by a food truck in East LA, a gang of racist Mexican thugs locked eyes on them, spewing insults before escalating to violence. They had no idea they had just provoked two of the world's toughest fighters. The gang launched a brutal attack. Big mistake. The two legends fought back, leaving the gang broken and humiliated. But the thugs returned with backup, including a monstrous enforcer known as El Diablo. Outnumbered yet fearless, Tyson and The Rock delivered a devastating beatdown they'd never forget. Subscribe and like this video to see how the story unfolds. It was a hot summer afternoon in Los Angeles. The streets of East LA were alive with the usual noise cars honking, people yelling, and vendors selling street tacos on the sidewalks. But in one particular neighborhood, trouble was brewing. A ruthless gang of racist Mexican thugs ran these streets, using fear to control their turf. They hated outsiders, especially anyone who didn't look like them. They had spent years terrorizing people, robbing stores, and assaulting anyone they deemed unworthy of stepping foot on their territory. They thought they were invincible. They thought they ruled these streets. But today was different. Today, they picked the wrong men to mess with. Narrating, because walking down that very street, completely unaware of the trouble ahead, were two of the most dangerous fighters to ever live, Mike Tyson, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The two legends had just finished a meeting nearby and decided to stop for some food. They weren't looking for a fight, but if a fight found them, it wouldn't end well for the other guys. Tyson and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson were casually walking toward a small taco stand on the street corner. Mike, dressed in his signature black t-shirt and dark jeans, his broad shoulder making him look like a force to be reckoned with. The Rock, wearing his tight gray shirt, his muscles straining against the fabric, exuded a confidence that could rival even the most hardened gangster. Tyson and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson just wanted to grab some tacos, but trouble had other plans. Unbeknownst to them, the Vatos Locos were watching, their eyes narrowed in contempt, their hatred for outsiders seething just below the surface. A group of 5 gang members stood nearby, leaning against their lowrider, smoking cigarettes and watching Mike Tyson and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson with hostile eyes. Their leader, a short but stocky guy with tattoos covering his arms and face, sneered as he noticed the two legends, his lips curling into a snarl of distaste. Well, mira lo que tenemos aquí, the gang leader said in Spanish, nudging one of his gang members. A couple of rich Hollywood boys walking through our barrio like they own the place? ¿Qué creen que están haciendo aquí? His crew, sensing his agitation, began to close ranks around him, their bodies tensing with anticipation. They don't belong here, Jefe, the second-in-command chuckled, his scarred face breaking into a grin. Maybe we should teach them a lesson. The other gang members laughed, a chorus of cruel mirth, as they closed in on the two unsuspecting legends, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. The leader smirked, his eyes dancing with the thrill of imminent violence. Maybe we should, he echoed, the words hanging in the air like a threat. The tension in the air was palpable, a taut web of hate and brutality. The gang members surrounded the legends like vultures circling their prey, waiting for their leader's signal to strike. Hey, gringos, the leader sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Lost or something? His question hung in the air, a challenge, a taunt. The other gang members watched, their eyes gleaming with malice, ready to pounce at a moment's notice. The Rock sighed, the heaviness of his breath punctuating the quiet tension of the moment. Man, I just wanted a taco, he muttered, his expression a mix of annoyance and resignation. Mike, ever the veteran of street fights, merely raised an eyebrow, his body coiled like a spring, ready for the inevitable clash. Guess we gotta teach some respect first, he growled, his words as menacing as the fists he was about to unleash. The gang, high on their own bravado and oblivious to the danger they courted, laughed at Mike Tyson's words, their sneers mirroring their leaders. You gonna teach U.S. respect? One of them scoffed, the audacity in his voice as thick as the heat in the air. In our neighborhood? Mike Tyson smiled, the corners of his mouth turning up in a predator's grin, revealing a row of teeth as sharp and lethal as his hooks. Yeah, he rumbled, his voice dropping to a menacing purr. One of the gang members, a hulking brute with a shaved head and a dragon tattoo coiling around his neck like a warning sign, stepped forward, emboldened by the gang's bravado. He fixed his eyes on The Rock, his face contorting into a mask of aggression. Without warning, He shoved the superstar hard in the chest, his meaty fist slamming into the Rock's torso like a battering ram. It was a mistake he would instantly regret. The Rock's solid form, carved from years of training and discipline, stood immovable in the face of the thug's violent outburst, like an indomitable fortress against the onslaught of a mere pebble. The thug stumbled, his shock and confusion as palpable as the sweat trickling down his neck. His jaw hung agape, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared up at the Rock's granite face, now fixed in a look of calm, almost indifferent defiance. The Rock smirked, his lips curving into a mocking grin as he regarded the thug with an air of condescension. "That's cute," he drawled, the amusement in his voice hinting at the fury that simmered beneath his cool exterior. With speed that belied his size, the Rock unleashed a devastating right hook, his fist rocketing into the thug's chest with the force of a wrecking ball. The blow reverberated through the thug's body like a seismic tremor, his ribs groaning in protest under the impact. The thug's back crashed against the gang's lowrider with a thunderous clang, his body crumpling against the metal like a discarded rag doll. The door of the car, no match for the Rock's raw power, buckled under the collision, leaving a deep indentation in the shape of a hunched figure. The gang, once poised for a vicious attack, found themselves paralyzed, their faces draining of color as the realization of the Rock's strength dawned on them like a slow, creeping dread. As the thug groaned, dazed and reeling from the brutal blow, Mike Tyson stepped forward, a feral grin curling the corners of his mouth. "Now it's my turn," he rumbled, a hint of delight in his voice as he eyed the remaining gang members like a pack of wolves circling a wounded deer. As the foolish gang member, knife-wielding and adrenaline-fueled, lunged at Mike Tyson with all the fury of a rabid pit bull, he sealed his own fate. Mike Tyson, his body a lethal weapon honed by years in the ring, weaved his way through the thug's assault with the grace of a seasoned boxer. Dodging left, Tyson slid under the knife, his movements as fluid as water. In a split second, he dropped into a crouch, his body coiled like a spring, his eyes fixed on the target. The right hook exploded from Tyson's body with the force of a cannon blast, catching the thug square in the jaw. The punch, a devastating force of nature, connected with the thug's jaw like a wrecking ball through a glass window. The impact was catastrophic, sending the thug's body twisting and spiraling like a toy tossed by an angry child. His eyes rolled back in his skull, his legs buckled, and he hit the pavement with a sickening thud, unconscious and broken, a testament to the brutal efficiency of Tyson's technique. In the span of mere seconds, 2 of the gang's toughest members had been dispatched with brutal efficiency, a display that left the remaining thugs frozen in disbelief. In the blink of an eye, the gang leader's bravado evaporated like mist under the rising sun, his face contorting into a mask of panic. His hand darted to his waistband, his fingers brushing against the cold steel of the pistol nestled there. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity, the gang leader's movements slowed by the gravity of his situation. His hand fumbled with the gun, his fingers trembling as he struggled to draw it from his waistband, the seconds ticking away like a time bomb. Like a blur of black and gold, Tyson bridged the gap between himself and the thug in a fraction of a second, his body propelled by a blend of coiled strength and primal fury. The uppercut, a vicious blend of physics and brutality, connected with the thug's jaw, lifting him into the air like a rag doll tossed by an angry child. His body, propelled by the sheer force of the punch, flew upwards, his feet momentarily leaving the ground, before gravity, a cold and merciless mistress, yanked him back to the harsh reality of the pavement. The streets of East LA echoed with the thud of bodies hitting pavement, 2 thugs lying unconscious like discarded litter, the handiwork of Tyson's brutal efficiency. The remaining thugs stood rooted to the spot, their breath ragged, their bodies tensed in fear. Terror gripped them like a vice, their minds racing as they processed the reality of the situation, outmatched, outskilled, and outnumbered. The gang leader, the color draining from his face, stared at the pair of legends before him with newfound respect. The invincible armor of his arrogance shattered like glass under Tyson's fist. As the final gang members realized the futility of their situation, panic set in like a raging wildfire. In a frenzied bid for survival, one of the gang members made a desperate break for freedom, his feet pounding the pavement in a frantic dash for the nearest alley, but he had only taken a few steps when his escape was cut short by the Rock's outstretched hand, which snagged the back of his hoodie like a lasso. Mike Tyson, a force of nature in human form, evaded the wild swing of the second thug with the agility of a panther, his movements a deadly dance of evasion and counterattack. In a blur of fists and muscle, Tyson slipped the punch with a grace that belied his deadly power, his body twisting out of the thug's range like a ghost vanishing into the mist. And then, like a bolt of lightning, he struck. As the clash of fists and the crack of bones subsided, a lone figure stood trembling, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes darting between Mike Tyson and the Rock, like a hunted deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. The thug with the scar, his features twisted into a grimace of fear and desperation, was the last man standing. Mike Tyson and the Rock, sweat glistening on their muscles, closed in on him like predators circling their prey. The sight of his fallen brethren, scattered like broken toys across the pavement, had stripped the last thug of his bravado, his machismo reduced to a whimper of fear. Kneeling on the ground, his body shaking with terror, he begged for mercy like a man pleading for his life on the gallows. "Please," he stammered, his words thick with desperation. "I didn't mean it, I'm sorry." The two legends moved in, their steps slow and measured, their bodies brimming with the fury of titans. The Rock's voice, deep and powerful as a rolling thunder, echoed across the street. "You messed with the wrong people today, punk," he growled, his words dripping with venom. Like a bolt of lightning, the thug sprang to his feet and dashed into the nearest alley, his legs propelling him through the darkness with the urgency of a gazelle fleeing a pride of lions. The thundering footsteps of Mike Tyson and the Rock pursued him, their rage a driving force that pushed them forward, their fury a beacon that shone through the shadows. But as they rounded the corner of the alley, the thug was nowhere to be seen, vanished like smoke in the wind, a testament to the vagaries of fate and the desperation of survival. Surrounded by the unconscious forms of the fallen gang members, Mike Tyson and The Rock stood, their breathing still heavy, their bodies still coiled with adrenaline. Mike, the legend's frustrations simmering beneath his stony expression, let out a heavy sigh, the sound echoing through the alleyway like a bitter lament. "All I wanted was a damn taco," he grumbled, his words punctuated by a hint of irony. The Rock, his expression shifting from wry amusement to a hardened resolve, shook his head slowly. "You think they'll try again?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Mike, a glint of humor dancing in his eyes, cracked his knuckles with a sound like gunfire, the movement punctuated by a mischievous grin. "Let 'em try," he growled, his voice rumbling like an oncoming storm. And as the two legends emerged from the alleyway, their presence as imposing and unforgiving as ever, the neighborhood held its breath in anticipation of what would come next. As Mike Tyson and The Rock emerged onto the street, triumphant but wary, they were unaware of the hidden threat lurking in the shadows. The lone gang member, the sole survivor of their devastating assault, had escaped into the darkness, his mind a maelstrom of vengeance and bloodlust. And while the two legends rejoiced in their victory, a silent and sinister plot was unfolding in the depths of East LA. Because the next time they met the Vatos Locos, it wouldn't just be a fight, it would be war. As the day drew to a close and the sun melted into the horizon, casting its final farewell in hues of blood and gold, the aftermath of the earlier clash was laid bare on the streets of East LA. The lowrider, once a symbol of pride and power, was now a crumpled mess of twisted metal and shattered glass, a testament to the prowess of the two legends who had delivered its occupants a devastating defeat. And amidst the debris, the wounded gang members stirred, their moans echoing through the twilight, their pain a haunting melody of hubris and defeat. Mike Tyson and The Rock stood together, their bodies bathed in the fading light of the dying sun, their eyes swept across the scene before them, taking in the remnants of their handiwork, their lips curling into satisfied grins. Wiping away the beads of sweat from his brow, Mike turned to the rock, his gaze steady and determined. "You think that was it?" he asked, his voice a rumble of defiance and anticipation. "Or you think those boys are going to come crawling back for more?" The rock, his expression a portrait of grim certainty, shook his head in agreement. "Nah," he growled, his voice as solid as the muscles that rippled beneath his shirt. "Those boys, they ain't going to let this slide. They'll be back, and they'll come back with everything they got." Like a death knell in the still of the evening, the sound of engines rumbled through the streets of East LA. The rumble grew louder, the thundering roar of motorcycles and muscle cars carving through the quiet like a howling hurricane. The legends, their faces hardening into masks of defiance, turned to face the threat that was fast approaching. They were coming, not to negotiate or make peace, but to settle a score that had been set ablaze like a wildfire in the hearts of the Vatos Locos. From the east, a thunderous procession of motorcycles roared into view, their chrome glinting in the fading light like blades honed for battle, and behind them a caravan of muscle cars, engines snarling like feral beasts, rumbled down the streets, a dark cloud of smoke and fury billowing in their wake. The legends exchanged a glance, their lips twisted into grimaces of anticipation. With a deafening screech of tires and the howl of revving engines, the convoy surrounded the legends, cutting off all avenues of escape. 4 muscle cars, their paint jobs glistening under the streetlights, roared to a halt, their engines idling like the promise of violence. 5 motorcycles skidded to a stop, their riders dismounting with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The leader of the gang, his face twisted in rage, stepped forward, his chest heaving with anger and vengeance. The tattoos that adorned his arms and neck seemed to writhe with fury, the black ink vivid against his sun-baked skin. "You two," he snarled, his voice cracking with hatred. "Think you can come into our neighborhood, mess with our business, and get away with it?" His hand drifted towards the pistol tucked into the waistband of his jeans, a silent threat of impending violence. With a broken nose, a split lip, and eyes blazing with rage, the gang leader stood like a wounded beast, backed into a corner, ready to lash out with everything he had. The gang leader's voice boomed through the street, his words carrying the weight of a ruthless determination. "You two just made the worst mistake of your lives," he growled, his eyes shining with the fervor of a true believer. "We run this city. We own these streets, and you're going to pay for crossing us." The gang members behind him echoed his sentiments with a chorus of feral cheers and the rattling of their weapons, their bloodlust palpable in the air. The Rock, his expression one of resigned impatience, shook his head and sighed. "Here we go again." The words left his mouth like a puff of air, as if this scene had played out 1,000 times before. Mike Tyson, on the other hand, wasted no time in breaking the tension. Cracking his knuckles like the prelude to a storm, he stepped forward, his muscles coiling like springs ready to unleash havoc. "You talk too much, let's just get this over with." With a snap of his fingers, the gang leader set the gears of violence in motion. His words, his voice booming with savage ferocity, rang out like a starting gun. "Kill them!" he bellowed, unleashing the pent-up rage and hatred that had been brewing like a tempest inside him. The gang, like a pack of rabid wolves, roared their battle cry, charging towards the 2 legends like a wave of human carnage, brandishing their makeshift weapons with wild abandon. The first wave of gang members, a deluge of hatred and violence, descended upon Mike Tyson and The Rock like a maelstrom. Their faces, contorted with feral rage, carried a confidence born of their numbers, like a pack of predators cornering their prey. Swords, knives, and pipes flashed in the dim streetlight, their gleaming surfaces betraying the murderous intent of their wielders. Mike Tyson wasted no time. Like a blur of destruction and precision, he unleashed his arsenal of devastating punches. The first thug, his eyes wide with fear as he brought his pipe down on Tyson's skull, was met with a left hook that echoed through the street like a thunderclap. The thug's jaw broke like a toothpick, his face snapping to the side as he crumpled to the ground, stunned by the sheer power of Tyson's strike. Tyson's fists worked like a hurricane, a flurry of devastating punches dancing across the faces of his attackers. The Rock, his body honed from years of wrestling and blockbuster action scenes, moved with a fluidity that belied his size. As a metal pipe swung towards his skull, The Rock's hand shot out, his massive fingers wrapping around the weapon like a steel vise. With a single fluid motion, he wrenched the pipe from the stunned thug's grip, the weapon bending and buckling like it was made of rubber in The Rock's massive hands. The Rock's massive arm flexed, the veins bulging under his skin like cords of steel as he spun the pipe around like a baton twirler. With a vicious swing, he brought the pipe crashing into the thug's ribcage with the force of a wrecking ball. The thug's body contorted midair, his ribs snapping like kindling before he crashed into a nearby car windshield, the glass shattering under the impact, a chorus of crunching bone and breaking glass heralding his defeat. As the thug crashed through the windshield, the sound of breaking glass was drowned out by the sharp crack of a gunshot. A pistol, its barrel spitting a cloud of smoke, spat its deadly projectile towards the Rock like a vengeful god delivering its wrath. The Rock, his reflexes honed from years of action movie glory, twisted his massive body out of the bullet's path like a matador evading a charging bull. The slug tore through the air, missing its target by a hair's breadth before burying itself into the side of a nearby building with a metallic thud. Mike Tyson, his senses heightened to the razor's edge of instinct, saw the movement of the gunman before the bullet had even been fired. In a single explosive burst of speed, his feet seemed to barely touch the pavement as he lunged towards the thug, his arm snaking out like a viper. His massive hand clamped around the gunman's wrist like a vice, the bones audibly snapping under the pressure. The pistol, ripped from the thug's grip, discharged harmlessly into the air as he fell to his knees, his face twisted in a mask of agony. The thug, already crumpled in pain from his shattered wrist, looked up to see Mike Tyson's face inches from his own, the boxer's eyes blazing with fury. "You don't bring guns to a fistfight," Mike snarled, his voice low and deadly, as he delivered a brutal headbutt with the force of a speeding train. The thug's body collapsed like a sack of rocks, his eyes rolling up into his skull as he was launched into the darkness of oblivion. Meanwhile, The Rock, his massive arms shaking off the desperate blows of two thugs like the tugs of angry gnats, drove forward with a furious roar. With the grace of a ballet dancer and the power of a bull, he scooped up the thugs and lifted them clear off the ground, their eyes widening in terror as they realized their fate. Mike Tyson and The Rock, two legends forged in the fires of physical brutality, now moved like demons possessed, their bodies a symphony of violence, their fists and kicks raining down on the gang members with the force of a natural disaster. The gang, their bravado, shattered like broken glass, began to falter as they realized that they were up against forces beyond their comprehension. Like children who had picked a fight with the gods, they were outclassed, outmatched, and overpowered by the sheer ferocity of their opponents. As the gang members fell like dominoes before the unrelenting onslaught of Mike Tyson and The Rock, the gang leader's resolve began to crumble. Fear like icy water flooded his veins as he realized that his entire crew was about to be decimated by these two titans of pain. In a moment of desperation, he let out a primal scream that echoed through the streets like a death knell. "Traigan a el diablo, ahora!" The sound of heavy boots against the pavement sent a chill down the spines of the two legends. Even amidst the chaos of the brawl, this new sound was distinct. The footsteps of something large, something powerful, something that radiated a sense of dread that was palpable even from a distance. As Mike Tyson and The Rock turned their attention towards the source of the footsteps, a hulking shadow detached itself from the passenger side of a muscle car, looming over the chaos like a monster from the deepest nightmares. Covered in a tapestry of tattoos that told 1,000 stories of violence and brutality, the giant's skin was a canvas of pain. A scar, like a jagged bolt of lightning, cleaved down his left eye, a testament to a battle long past, but still very much alive in the stories whispered in the darkest corners of East LA. And his muscles, they rippled with raw power, each flex revealing a strength and ferocity that rivaled that of the legends themselves. This was El Diablo, the devil. El Diablo, The legend of the gang world. The enforcer who had risen through the ranks of the cartel with a brutal efficiency and a thirst for violence that could never be quenched had been unleashed upon the two legends. His massive fists clenched, the knuckles cracked like bones snapping under a sledgehammer, his eyes, cold as the grave, fixed upon the two men who had dared to challenge his gang's supremacy. This was his domain, his territory, and these legends, they had no place here. As the gang roared in support, their cheers bouncing off the buildings like echoes of impending bloodshed, Mike Tyson and The Rock stood unflinching, their bodies poised for battle, their smiles as wicked as the grin of a hyena. The Rock, rolling his shoulders in a display of strength and readiness, let out a booming laugh that carried over the din. "Finally," he said, his words laced with a hint of sadistic glee, "a challenge." As The Rock's laughter echoed through the streets, Mike Tyson's fists clenched like the jaws of a bear trap, his knuckles turning white with the force of his grip. "Let's see what you got," he said, his voice deadly and calm. The air seemed as still for a moment, the silence broken only by the ragged breathing of the gang members and the thudding of the rocks in Mike's hearts, like the beating of war drums in the night. El Diablo, a force of nature in his own right, charged towards the Rock, his bulk moving with an agility that belied his size. His fist, like a cinder block hurled from a speeding train, whistled towards the Rock with bone-crushing force. The Rock, his reflexes honed to perfection, twisted his body in a fluid motion, slipping just out of the path of the monster's blow. The air, displaced by the sheer power of the punch, whistled past his cheek, sending a chill down his spine. El Diablo's speed and skill were a lethal combination, challenging the Rock's defenses in ways few had ever managed. It was clear that this wasn't just a thug with brute force. This was a predator, a seasoned fighter with a lifetime of violence under his belt. As the Rock dodged and parried, El Diablo's footwork adjusted, his strikes becoming more measured and precise, his eyes scanning for weaknesses like a surgeon studying an X-ray. Mike Tyson, a predator in his own right, recognized the skill of his opponent and knew that speed was crucial in this battle. He unleashed a barrage of punches, his fists a blur of blinding speed and precision. Hooks and jabs, uppercuts and crosses, all aimed with surgical precision at El Diablo's head and body. Mike's ferocity was undeniable, his every movement infused with the savage efficiency of a lifetime in the ring. He was a whirlwind of violence, pushing El Diablo back step by step, his fists raining down like hammers on an anvil. El Diablo, caught off guard by the swiftness of Tyson's footwork, instinctively blocked the first few punches, his brawny arms serving as shields against the onslaught. But then, as if by magic, Tyson shifted to the left, his body gliding like a ghost across the pavement. And in that split second, the opening revealed itself, a chink in El Diablo's armor. Without hesitation, Tyson lashed out with a brutal uppercut that connected squarely with the beast's jaw, snapping his head back with a sickening crack. The Rock, sensing the opportunity like a shark scenting blood in the water, pounced on the opening like a leopard on an unsuspecting antelope. Moving with lightning speed, he slammed into El Diablo from the side, his body crashing into the giant like a wrecking ball into a brick wall. The impact, violent and deafening, sent El Diablo reeling backwards, his feet losing purchase on the pavement. The gang, once brazen and brash, now stood frozen in disbelief, their eyes wide with horror as they watched their champion falter for the first time. El Diablo, his body quaking with effort, struggled to get up, his legs wobbling like jelly beneath him. His face, twisted in pain and humiliation, was a stark contrast to the fierce visage that had once inspired fear in even the toughest of foes. The legends stood towering above him, their silhouettes casting ominous shadows over the fallen titan, their presence an omen of doom for the once unstoppable monster. Mike Tyson, his voice a blade of ice slicing through the heated tension, approached El Diablo with deliberate steps. The Colossus, still struggling to rise to his feet, looked up at Tyson with eyes that were now filled with something akin to fear, his once powerful presence reduced to a trembling mess. Tyson's words, direct and uncompromising, rang out like a death sentence. "Stay down." El Diablo, the fire of defiance burning in his eyes, refused to bow down with a guttural roar that echoed through the night like the bellow of a cornered bear. He launched himself at The Rock with all the desperation of a condemned man fighting for his life. His massive frame, propelled by sheer adrenaline and rage, crashed into The Rock like a freight train, sending the two titans sprawling across the pavement in a blur of fists and curses. As El Diablo charged, The Rock met him head-on, his massive frame a wall of muscle and determination. Without hesitation, he swung his right hand in a thunderous arc, the punch connecting with El Diablo's jaw like a wrecking ball demolishing a building. In that moment, El Diablo's eyes rolled into the back of his head, his pupils dilating into black pools of shock and pain. His knees, once a pillar of strength, buckled, sending him crashing to the ground in a twisted heap of muscle and defeat. The gang, witnesses to the titanic clash between their champion and the legendary duo, stood in stunned silence as El Diablo's hulking frame lay still on the ground, his body a crumpled monument to his defeat. The air, once thick with aggression and the promise of violence, grew still, the sound of their breathing mingling with the distant howl of sirens as the police drew closer. In that moment, the gang knew, with the certainty of a falling star, that they had lost. They had been beaten, not just physically, but in spirit. Like a startled flock of birds, the gang members scattered, abandoning their fallen comrades with a cowardly haste. Their earlier bravado, reduced to ashes by the devastating display of Tyson and The Rock's prowess, was nowhere to be seen as they frantically piled into their muscle cars and roared off into the night, their tires screeching in protest. The gang leader, his bravado now a distant memory, tried to slip away unnoticed, but Mike Tyson, his gaze as sharp as the edge of a knife, grabbed him by the collar, yanking him back with a force that shook his entire body. "Listen to me," Mike growled, his words carrying the weight of a death sentence. "You and your boys, you see us again, you run the other way, got it? Or next time I'll make sure you're not even breathing to hear my warning." With a savage thrust, Mike Tyson released the gang leader, tossing him aside like a bag of rotten fruit. The leader, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief, scrambled into a car, fumbling with the keys as he tried to start the engine. With a squeal of tires and the roar of an engine, he sped off into the night, his headlights disappearing into the dark abyss. With a satisfied smirk, The Rock exhaled, his chest heaving with the aftermath of the adrenaline-fueled fight. "That," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet, "was fun." Mike Tyson, his shirt stained with the sweat of battle, dusted himself off with the air of a man tidying up after a minor inconvenience. "Now," he growled, the unmistakable sound of hunger rumbling in his stomach, "can we get some damn tacos? Because I'm starving." Across East LA, word spread like wildfire. The streets buzzed with whispers and rumors like bees in a hive abuzz with the nectar of gossip. People gathered in barber shops and street corners, sharing stories of how two legends, two titans of their respective crafts, had decimated an entire gang. Mothers told their children not to mess with strangers. Gang members retreated into the shadows, wary of the two men who had become living legends in their midst. The legend of Mike Tyson and The Rock spread like a wildfire through the underbelly of East LA, their names taking on a mythical quality that seemed to defy all boundaries of reality. Gang leaders, once confident in their grip on the streets, now whispered their names in hushed tones, their bravado replaced by fear and reverence. And as for the people, they carried their names like talismans, invoking them as a warning against those who dared to cross the line. For Mike Tyson and The Rock, the streets of East LA became their domain.